Charleston, South Carolina, 1873. A sick servant was traded for 3 pennies, less than the cost of a loaf of bread. The auctioneer banged the block, the crowd laughed, and yet in the city archives there are receipts, a ledger margin note, and a folded letter that together tell a different story. What those papers reveal changes everything we thought we knew about that day. Stay with this video to the end because the final entry in those files contains a twist that left an entire town speechless. The sun that afternoon hit the market square like a hot coin. The tang of salt from the harbor mixed with the sourness of sweat. Dust rose in thin clouds whenever a cart rolled by. The servant, thin shoulders wrapped in a threadbare shawl, coughed once and looked toward the quay as if listening to the creak of masts. Onlookers jeered. A boy hawking oranges blinked against the glare, and a woman named Mrs. Pritchard tightened her grip on a basket as if to hide from the scene. Most saw only a body to be discarded. But someone who later signed a document as Elias Mercer would write, decades after, that there was something in that figure's eyes that did not belong to defeat. The market that morning smelled of wet leather and horse sweat. The sound of copper coins clinking came like a small accusation. Thomas Rowe, the auctioneer, rubbed his palms and called the lot with the showmanship of a man used to selling hogs and harnesses. "Lot 37, he announced, voice rough, 1 servant, infirm." People pushed forward. Samuel Briggs, a thin merchant with a permanent frown, spat and said, "She won't last the season." Reverend Amos Clark muttered a prayer under his breath, and Abby Lyle, who sold candles at the corner, hid her face. A laborer named Mateo laughed and slapped his knee. Captain Elias Mercer, a permanent figure at the docks with a sunburned face and a heavy coat, raised a single coin and the deal was done. 3 pennies, Rowe proclaimed, and the market erupted in low laughter. The scene was public humiliation, a person reduced to a price so small it barely registered. Dialogue spilled out, not as summary, but as the raw exchanges recorded later in a local diary that an archivist would find. "She looks like nothing," said Briggs. 2 pennies and I'll take her, Mateo joked. "She's bought," Rowe said. "Good riddance," someone shouted. The crowd's voices were awash. Amusement, hunger, relief. The sound of a cart's wheel, the scrape of a leather strap, the metallic clink of a small purse closing. Those were the textures of that moment, and they lingered in the records as details that mattered. Marta Cole, the servant, had a past that refused to fit the pitying faces around her. Born in a coastal village, she had learned the rhythm of tides before she learned to read, and that rhythm taught her to measure time not by clocks but by the trade winds that came with the morning fog. Her mother, Rosa, had died when Marta was 9, leaving a narrow note sewn into a hem. "Keep your feet steady, keep your eyes." By 15, Marta had moved to Charleston to serve in the home of the Harcourt family, where she learned to mend nets and tally small debts. The city took more than it gave. She watched brothers shipped away, savings lost to bad ledgers, and still she kept a habit she called counting the gaps, the empty hours in a market day where bargains were whispered. When fever struck her at 21, it came quick and ruthless. Fever stripped muscle from her arms. Cough hollowed her chest. She dwindled to 85 pounds. That sickness reshaped her body and sharpened her memory. The second paragraph of her backstory shows the development of an unusual attention to detail. She had been the one to notice the captain's routes, the dock workers' paydays, the months when ships sat idle. The third paragraph ties this memory to the present. When she was carried to the auction block and someone said the price aloud, she did not simply accept it. She cataloged it. She memorized names, dates, the rhythm of commerce as others memorized hymns, and those small facts would later become tools. The person who stepped in after the sale was Captain Elias Mercer. The purchase was not dramatic. It was a businesslike transaction recorded in a thin receipt found years later, but the words and the spoken exchanges were clear enough in recollection to reconstruct. "You sure about this, Captain?" Rowe asked, leaning in. "She'll be sick for weeks," Abby Lyle warned, voice small. Elias looked at Marta, then at the 3 pennies in his palm, then back at the quay as if weighing sails. "For the price," he said, "I'll bring her aboard. We'll see." Marta, coughing, tried to speak and was steadied by a woman named Lydia Harcourt, who later would recall the scene in a letter. "You come with us," Lydia said softly. "We'll get you on your feet." Over the next days, the captain's quarters smelled alternately of salt and boiled herbs. The rope's roughness scraped Marta's palm. The taste of broth returned to her tongue like something sacred. The crew, First Mate Benjamin Hale, cook Rosa Jimenez, and deckhand Peter Cole, argued about whether she could handle a voyage. Their voices were notes in the same small orchestra that became her recovery. Dialogue between Elliot the cook and Benjamin went on in long exchanges, each revealing something practical. "She needs broth steady." "We have ginger." "Keep her near the galley." "I'll show her how to stitch sails." "Do we trust her?" "We trust hands that keep count." Those lines show the slow rebuilding of a person and the practical work behind it. Rationing, warm compresses, a regimen of rest. The first inked proof that Marta was not merely a sick laborer came in small notations. A ledger entry by Captain Mercer, a margin note in a shipping manifest, a hurried line in a trade receipt. Test and observation followed. In a cramped captain's cabin, Marta began to annotate arrival times, jotting the exact hour when ships lifted anchor and the names of tradesmen who sought cargo on certain weekdays. She moved invisible fingers through the language of the docks. Which ships paid freight in coin versus credit, which wholesalers favored a particular kind of bale, and which weather patterns delayed merchants for days. One evening, by the light of a single lantern, she and Elias argued in an expanded exchange that would be later copied into a family Bible. "You write as if you have the market in your head," Elias said. "I remember the tides," Marta replied. "You recall the men who underpay," Elias countered. "I remember numbers," she said. Their dialogue extended over many back and forths, revealing not only skill but the method. Listening to braggart porters, noting the cadence of invoices, translating gossip into schedules. Sensory details, salt-stiff hair, the metallic ring of a bell, the greasy residue of tar on fingers accompanied each stage of discovery. Documents later found in the municipal archive show the first measurable change. A cargo that once took 6 days to clear was processed in 4, a difference that transformed margins. Moment of tension 1. The first true test came when a perishable cargo rotted faster than expected, and the captain faced a choice that would cost him reputation or cash. Crew and captain argued under the cold light of dawn. Marta's suggestion to reroute the cargo met scorn. She stood smaller than the men, voice thin, but insisted. In 2 short paragraphs, the memory returns. Panic in the hold, the smell of decay, a ledger open on a wet barrel. Marta counted openings in paperwork and used a small, precise calculation to propose a new buyer in Savannah who would accept quick repayment. The decision split the crew. If she was wrong, they lost the season. If right, they gained leverage. In that cramped, pressured moment, she turned knowledge into action, and the ship changed course. A risky maneuver that paid off and bought the crew a margin of trust. Word of the strange efficiency spread. Elias began to test Marta in business rather than domestic tasks. He sent her to negotiate with dock brokers, Samuel Briggs, Esther Cole, Clerk Harrison. She moved with a quiet determination, watching the cadence of offers and replies, hearing the creak of ledger pages and the low cough of men who thought themselves clever. In an extended bargaining scene composed of many exchanges, Marta faced Samuel Briggs at his stall. "You want that bale moved?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "I can arrange freight." "For coin?" he scoffed. "For terms," she answered. Back and forth, 6, then 8 exchanges, where she traded precision for credibility. She proposed staggered payments timed to market cycles, she suggested shared risk, she named buyers by score. The sensory world was present, the grainy feel of pipe smoke, the taste of cheap coffee shared between negotiations. Papers were signed. First Mate Benjamin watched from across the quay, hands clenched, as the numbers she articulated translated into small profits recorded by Elias later as unexpected but valid. Now we pause to involve you. If you felt the sting of that market humiliation, join the community. In the comments below, complete this sentence. Start it with, The first thing I would do is, and finish with no more than 3 words. Type only those words. Your answer helps us map reactions to public shame and resilience and fuels future episodes where we compare how different people imagine survival. If you are shocked, you are not alone. Many who witnessed the transaction then felt the same blend of outrage and disbelief. Your short reply matters because it shows how you would prioritize a first step when everything is taken. Thank you for sharing. Now back to the archives and the ledger entries that prove how a servant's small notations rippled into real commerce. Discovery matured into a deliberate strategy. Marta, with the quiet authority of someone who had learned to count the gaps, proposed a system that was equal parts calendar and credit. Freight windows mapped to payday cycles, small lines of credit extended to trustworthy brokers, and a rotation of cargo that minimized spoilage. She documented everything on scraps that would later become a bound booklet found between the pages of Captain Mercer's account book. Elias called meetings with allies, Benjamin Hale, Rosa Jimenez, Lydia Harcourt, Clerk Harrison, and even an unlikely ally in Reverend Amos Clark, each given a role. "We move this load on Thursday," Marta said in one expanded scene to 8 exchanges with the crew, dictating who would fetch manifests, who would sign receipts, who would clerk payments. She assigned Mateo to timing of departures and Samuel Briggs to find buyers willing to stagger payments. The plan was operational and granular. Who fed men when, how many sacks per cart, what to invoice first. Sensory detail threaded the plan. The prick of ink on paper, the creak of a ledger's binding, the thick warmth of stew that kept men working late. The first month under her system showed measurable change. Turnaround time cut by 20%, losses to spoilage down by half. Documents stamped with dates and initials served as proof. The town began to whisper that the captain's ship ran like a small, precise machine now, and Marta had the blueprints. Moment of tension 2. Competition arose when a rival ship owner, Captain Horace Duvall, sought to undercut their routes by spreading rumors of the captain's insolvency. A public confrontation unfolded at the Harbor's Inn, recorded in a newspaper clipping kept by Lydia Harcourt. 2 men shouted, the floorboards bruised with boots, and Marta found herself pulled into a test of credibility. She stepped forward, hands steady though her chest panged, remembered illness, and presented a schedule of buyers and payment promises, names and dates. The exchange was fierce and loud. The room smelled of ale and wood polish. For a few bruised minutes, the ledger stood between belief and ruin. Her proof, precise and sensory, turned the tide. The inn's patrons read the margins and leaned toward trust. As operations scaled, Marta and Elias looked beyond the harbor. They formed partnerships, signed small contracts, and began to extend credit to neighborhood shopkeepers. Esther Cole, a grocer, Mr. Halverson, a cloth merchant, and Edith Moore, owner of a dye works. Men and women who once sneered now sought terms. The system required logistics, carts, hired drivers, inventory lists, and an accounting method that tracked payments in a way that proved reliable to lenders. Marta kept meticulous lists: who owed what, weight of bales, even the smell of certain spices that marked a supplier's route. Allies multiplied. Dr. Jonathan Avery vouched for her health improvements. Lydia Harcourt provided access to municipal ledgers. Clerk Harrison notarized agreements. Each name added a degree of legitimacy. Profits were small at first, but steady. Monthly ledgers showed net income rising by measured percentages that Elias recorded in his private account. The operation moved from shipboard improvisation to a coastal network. Sensory cues remained: the chalky dust of feed, the tang of rope, the scratch of pen on paper. Moment of tension 3. The highest risk came when the group decided to bid on a stalled warehouse in a foreclosure sale, a gamble that could either secure a stable processing hub or bankrupt them. The sale took place in a courthouse filled with murmurs and the sharp smell of ink. Marta stood at the back, fingers folded on a small purse, watching as bidders named numbers. Elias whispered strategy across 9 or 10 exchanges back and forth with his advisors. Should they bid openly? Should they rely on aliases? Could they secure credit from Reverend Amos? The stakes were city-wide. With the warehouse, they could control throughput and prices. Without it, rivals might buy and crush margins. Negotiations stretched. The floorboards seemed to vibrate with each call. In the end, Marta suggested a staggered bid paired with credit lighters Lydia had arranged. They won the lot by a sliver. The warehouse, with its smells of tar and old grain, became the pivot that transformed an ad hoc scheme into a regional enterprise. The climax was not a single shout, but a chain of careful moves: acquisition of assets, filling them with contracted goods, and the institutionalization of credit. Over several months, the ledger expanded to include mortgage notes, payroll, and a printed receipt form that bore the name M. Cole & Co. The townspeople who once mocked the three-penny sale now queued for invoices. Records show that within 2 years, the operation employed 24 workers, controlled 3 carts, and held contracts with 5 regular merchants. Documented profits allowed them to buy a second vessel and eventually to underwrite small loans. For local families, Marta, once frail, walked the warehouse floor with a cloth over her shoulder, smelling dust and oil, listening for the rhythm of men at work. She could still name the day a particular bale came in by the way the rope smelled and the buyer's gait. The town's registry, now full of stamped pages, recorded a name at the top: M. Cole & Co. The epilogue traces the impact over time in 3 measured snapshots. 1 month after the warehouse purchase, the immediate effect was logistical and emotional. Work orders came faster, creditors who had doubted them softened, and 5 previously unpaid laborers received the first steady wages they had had in months. The local paper noted a newly organized freight concern, and neighbors like Esther Cole and Mateo publicly acknowledged new reliability in deliveries. 3 months on the books showed tangible redistribution. Small lines of credit had been repaid on schedule, a modest donation to the town's orphanage was logged, and a formal ledger entry documented that 10 families had received short-term loans to repair roofs before winter. Letters in the municipal archive show Lydia Hartcourt advocating to the council for recognition of the system as a stabilizing economic force. 6 months later, the effects rippled wider. Employment numbers rose. The warehouse hired an apprentice program that trained local youth in inventory and accounting, and the town's merchant tax receipts increased by a documented 12%. A council report, now bound and stamped, credited the operation with stabilizing food prices during a short drought. These numbers matter because they show how a single, unlikely investment of pennies and patience produced measurable social change. Records that validate this arc exist: receipts signed by Elias Mercer, a ledger bound in oil-stained leather with notes in Marta's hand, a letter from Reverend Amos Clark endorsing a credit arrangement, and a municipal ordinance that later recognized M. Cole & Co. as a legitimate business. These documents are the hinge between the insult of the auction block and a small local revolution in commerce. The lesson is stark. Value is not fixed at the moment of humiliation. In one article of faith and ledger balance, a sick servant and a skeptical captain converted desperation into an operational model that shifted employment, credit, and dignity for a community. If you felt the injustice in that opening scene, consider what the records ask us to notice: meticulous observation, patient accounting, and the willingness to bet on someone others had discarded. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see how small acts and sharp minds can change the course of a town. Comment with your 3-word reply to our prompt and subscribe for more documentary reconstructions where we open dusty ledgers, read marginalia, and show how individual strategies reshaped entire economies. The final image is simple but stubborn. 3 pennies that bought a body became the seed capital for a company, for jobs, and for a quiet redistribution of opportunity. The ledger says it plainly. The town remembers it quietly. Value, in the end, was never the coin they paid, but the work they were willing to do with it.